Dad was born in a small country town in 1921. He grew up in an atmosphere which had limited experience in art and therefore little interest in it. Dad's father was a Baptist minister, so things like art were not seen as part of family culture. I think the environment would have had an influence on his belief system. He certainly relates stories of his father's sense of humanity.
As an artist and a person, Allan is a very quiet, he's a very reticent person in many ways. He's always happier for other people to take the limelight. So he would be much more likely, when you were talking to him, to talk about another artist's work that he'd just seen. To get him talking about his own work has always been extremely difficult.
Dad's process of drawing is very much from memory. His natural drawing ability serves him very well because he can work from memory very accurately. So it's very much a storytelling process.
When we were in Greece, we had some friends come and stay with us, and they were embarrassing because they would see a woman on a donkey and they'd very obviously go and take a photograph of this woman on a donkey. I was appalled by their refusal to consider the feelings of the people involved. It taught me a lesson not to do like that.
He doesn't like to draw people where they can see him because he feels it somehow makes them objects of his gaze, which he doesn't feel comfortable with. So he will make very careful mental notes and then reproduce that back in the studio.
I just feel you owe people a certain amount of privacy, and to invade them by drawing them seems to me to be over the top.
When he came out of the army, he enrolled in the National Gallery School as a full-time student. The National Gallery School was the main art school in Melbourne, and one of the major ones in Australia. Dad was associating with what they called the social realists, and that was, in a sense, a big influence on him, that set of ideas of art reflecting life and having a direct relationship to the world around them. In a sense, Dad could see what you could do with this thing called art.
I appreciate the fact that the social realists really set me on a course that I didn't deviate from for many years. The difference was I was more interested in the brotherhood of man than the socialist side of the thing. I just thought that the encompassing of all types of people would give me a way of expressing myself that was adequate for years and years and years.
One of the important social and political aspects of Australian culture has been, for Dad, the relationship between the Aboriginal culture of Australia and white Australia. It was also something that was very characteristic of his moving from Melbourne to Western Australia, where there were communities of Aboriginal people that he came in contact with that he hadn't experienced before. I think it was very much a political action to put figures of these Aboriginal characters into paintings, and then those paintings living in the lounge rooms of white middle class, was quite a political statement, and bearing in mind this was before the 1967 referendum.
Some of his images seem to be a little bit dated these days, probably not terribly PC for certainly some Aboriginal people. But you do have to see it in the context of the time. He was really attempting to ennoble Aboriginal people.
I have been rebuked by people opening my exhibitions for being too socially conscious. I remember a Monsignor particularly, and he thought there was too much social comment in the paintings.
The painting, The Little Girl in Broom, is one of my favourites. It really does have those qualities that he represents in his work, the painterly qualities of the background, the single figure in the foreground, the shadowy tones of that figure so that you're not quite sure who it is.
And that's the other thing about Allan's work, that there is a resilience in those figures. Even in some of the more desperate images, you get the sense that the human being will survive, that this isn't an image of a dying race or of starving people who are condemned to death, but somehow there's a spark of humanity that will secure their salvation.
I think working retrospectively, you get what is essential to the experience, what it felt like. And so it actually extracts from that a true quality of that experience, rather than necessarily a naturalistic representation.
A lot of Allan's paintings, particularly those paintings of Aboriginal people or even the people starving in India, have a certain resonance for us now because the situation hasn't changed. There are a lot of Aboriginal people who are still suffering. There are a lot of people around the world who are still starving. So the images that we see, although they are locked back in time, and we know, of course, that they were painted in the 50s or the 60s, nevertheless, those situations are still current. And Allan was always such a powerful image maker that they almost transcend time.
The painting called Grandpa Mort is an interesting example of the way Dad used the feeling and the sensitivity to the Aboriginal culture, the traditional cultures. The quote that he has in his notebooks about that is very close to how he feels himself as a philosophy. I would like to see things change and all of us live quietly together and bring no harm to each other.
And bring no harm to each other.
Yeah.
I like that.
I would like us all to live in friendship, black and white and other races. I'd also like to see an end to greed. It causes such trouble in the world.
That's for sure. Dad hasn't done self-portraits in the past,
possibly because he was interested in doing characters that he saw around him that he felt empathetic towards, rather than painting himself as a study. He did this particular self-portrait for an exhibition which was about self-portraits, and so it was effectively a commission. He did have another idea to put himself in one of his picnic races paintings as a character in the crowd, hide himself in there in the crowd, and that was, we thought that was a good idea. But he opted to put a composite together of all these characters from his past.